UFC 281, Israel Adesanya versus Alex Pereira. Welcome to your full card prediction video presented by yours truly here at Boxing MMA Picks. Harris flying solo again for this UFC 281 pay-per-view event, but nonetheless, it's business as usual. We want to give you fight-by-fight breakdowns, fight-by-fight predictions, specifically from that betting perspective. Want to let you know which fights are worth the value, which fights to avoid, which underdog has the best shot at winning, and some parlay action towards the end of the video as well. Make sure you subscribe to the channel here at Boxing MMA Picks. Make sure you hit the thumbs up on this video. And most importantly, we want to hear from you in the comments. UFC 281, we have 14 fights overall, 9 of them are on the prelims, so we're going to get right to work with fight number 1. Carlos Ulberg taking on Nicolae Negumereanu. For Carlos Ulberg, he's on a 2-fight winning streak. He beat Tefanu Nchukwi. That was back in June. A highly talented kickboxer. He's light on the feet, good, quick, accurate, diverse striking, good movement, good combinations, a lot of fakes and feints. Multiple-time kickboxing champion. So again, just speaking to his accolades, speaking to how legitimately credentialed he is. Of course, city kickboxing product as well. So you definitely know he has it in him. Good power in his hands as well. We saw that in his last fight, getting that knockout again versus Tefanu Nchukwi. Some red flags we've seen with him. Cardio is a bit of a concern. He's been a bit chinny in the past as well. And we're seeing here on Tapology, only 36% of people think that Ulberg is going to win this fight. He's taking on Nicolae Negumereanu, who is on a 4-fight winning streak, beat Ihor Pereira back in July. For Negumereanu, stand-up is decent. It lacks some technique, but it is serviceable. Doesn't really have the best striking defense. I think that's what could really hurt him in this fight. Likes to fight coming forward, likes to put on that constant pressure, likes to engage, has that toughness factor. Seems to have a chin as well. Has some wrestling, or wrestling is kind of that strong suit of his, but the takedowns don't really show for that. Only 1 takedown per fight, just 28% accuracy as well. But to that point, not necessarily a weakness. He's someone that's going to want to clinch against the cage, really try to grind it out, keep you on there, attempt the takedowns, and even if he can't land it, he's going to go for that control time. So I wouldn't be too weary of the actual takedown number itself. We're looking at a classic striker versus wrestler matchup here. Carlos Ulberg, he's not always going to be the one pushing the pace. He kind of allows himself to get backed up. He's willing to fight from the outside. I think that could cost him here with Negumereanu's consistent pace that he puts on. But this fight could also go very similarly to Carlos Ulberg's last fight, where it could end quickly on the feet because Ulberg has a significant striking advantage in this fight as well. It really is about who will be able to implement their respective style. And I'm kind of rolling the dice here. I'm kind of going against the Tapology grain. Even though Carlos Ulberg is the favorite, I'm actually going to bet on Carlos Ulberg's style to pull through in this one for a few reasons. Firstly, Ulberg, 100% takedown defense. I know a small sample size, but we also know that the strikers at City Kickboxing, they really work on their takedown defense. So that is something that I'm sure they're game planning for. I'm sure he's actively worked on several times before, especially with his main strength being his kickboxing. And you pair that with Negumereanu's low takedown accuracy, this fight may not get to the mat, maybe at all, or just maybe won't get to the mat that many times. Also, in Nicolae's last fight, there were a lot of moments where his opponent, Ihor Pereira, was able to have a lot of time on the feet, win those exchanges in the feet. Negumereanu was striking with him, and Negumereanu was getting hit, right? What could cost Carlos Ulberg here is the cardio, but I think that Ulberg has that ability. I mean, again, Negumereanu has the chin, but I think Carlos Ulberg has that ability to get Negumereanu out of here before that cardio starts to fade. So I'm looking at Carlos Ulberg to get it done. I cannot call this a confident pick. I mean, the odds themselves sort of prove that, how close this fight is. But again, what you're looking at is the better striker in Ulberg. Will he catch Negumereanu before his cardio tank gasses out? Because once his cardio tank gasses out, I'm looking at Negumereanu to control the second round, the third round, potentially win on points. But what I'm essentially betting on here is Carlos Ulberg getting Negumereanu out of here before that happens. Again, not confident enough to place a bet on this. It is a very close fight, but in terms of making a pick, I'm going to pick Carlos Ulberg. Moving on to the second fight, we have Julio Arce versus Montel Jackson. Julio Arce has a unanimous decision win over Daniel Santos in his last fight. That was back in April. Looked pretty good in that fight. He's a southpaw, has decent stand-up. He mixes it up really well, has good movement. He's light on his feet and fights from the outside. Decent combinations, good striking speed. He's a good natural kickboxer. He keeps it on the feet, right? Yet he is able to be outstruck, somewhat timid in his stance at times. Doesn't really throw enough strikes at times, but he showed me a lot of good things with his striking in his last fight. Showed me an active jab with his movement, showed me activity. He landed 127 strikes in that fight, which is way above his average. Showed me good striking defense as well. His cardio looks very consistent throughout the entirety of the fight. And, we can't forget that he has a legitimate 94% takedown defense, which will be very relevant for this fight. Montel Jackson, on the other hand, it's been over a year since his last fight. He beat JP Bays back in September of last year. So it's been almost a year, or just over a year, I should say, since his last fight. He's methodical, technical, well-paced striking, picks his shots really well. He controls the center of the octagon. Look for him to consistently be the fighter closing distance. Physically big and strong for the division. Again, has those big hands, has that big power. 4 takedowns per fight, almost 80% takedown accuracy as well. So he's definitely a strong offensive wrestler, has good takedowns. I will say maybe defensively, not the best, but I don't think that aspect of it is going to matter in this fight because, again, Julio Arce is a fighter that keeps it on the feet. I do think Julio Arce is a legitimate underdog here. We're looking at the odds. Montel Jackson minus 210 as a favorite. Julio Arce plus 175 as an underdog. Again, I think Arce is a legitimate dog here, and I think that is especially based on his last fight, because he was, consistently fighting from the outside. He was consistently proving himself to be a hard target to hit on the feet. And, again, just consistently being hard to track down with that consistent lateral movement that he has. So, and then especially if he puts the output with all of that, he could be a legitimate underdog in this situation. The physical factors, in my opinion, though, I think are going to play too much of a factor in this fight. Montel Jackson, very big. He's going to have almost a 6-inch reach advantage in this one. He's going to have 3 inches in height. Definitely going to be the more physically commanding fighter of the two. I think he's going to close distance effectively. I think he can hurt Julio Arce. I think he's strong enough to land that takedown despite Julio Arce having, pretty legitimate takedown defense. And, if not, I think he's going to be able to use his strength advantage to kind of grind Arce against the cage and win rounds via control and cage work. Overall, I see Montel Jackson as having a few different ways to win this fight. Whereas I'm looking at, if Julio Arce is going to be the fighter that wins, he's going to need to outstrike Jackson. And for Montel Jackson, he's had 8 fights in the UFC. That's never happened before. And that's saying a lot given the fact that Montel Jackson is not the most active striker in his own right. So again, I think Montel Jackson is going to be able to use that reach advantage to control the range, to close in on range effectively, to land that takedown when he chooses to do so. And potentially with that power that he has, he could hurt Arce as well. Whereas again, for Arce to win, it would have to be a point fight from the outside where he avoids the power for the entirety of the fight. And I just have a hard time seeing that happen. So I'm looking at Montel Jackson to get it done. Again, I don't want to call this the most confident pick for sure. I'm debating whether or not I would put this on a parlay. I think I would be very curious to see what they look like at face off. I want to see if Montel Jackson is as physically demanding as I think he is in this fight. And then from there, that's something that would potentially be on a parlay of mine. Let's move on to the third fight. We have Mike Trizano taking on Seung Choi. Mike Trizano is on a 2-fight losing streak. He lost to Lucas Almeida back in June. He's a kickboxer, primarily hands, though, I'd say. Definitely has a sharp calf kick as well. Decent long jab. He's a decent counter puncher. Has decent striking IQ just in general. Has good movement, gets out of the way of his opponent's punches. He can kind of play that stalker role as well, keep his opponents on the back foot. His offense isn't as active as it needs to be in those situations. But again, that stalking effect, that control effect, it can still prove to be effective and put him in good positions to land good opportunities. He's tough. He's not afraid to engage. He's not afraid to make it a fight. A pretty consistent fighter. You kind of know what you're going to get out of Mike Trizano, and that's a solid overall kickboxer. Seung Choi, on the other hand, had a split decision loss to Joshua Kulabau back in June. 2 losses in a row now. He has that stalking pressure style of stand up in his own right, decent footwork to get in and out of range in his own right. He mixes it up really well, maybe has a bit more striking diversity by comparison, uses that jab really well as a setup punch. He's aggressive in the clinch. I mean, he's a Korean Muay Thai champion, so that's pretty self explanatory. And you definitely have to respect his power, especially, going back to a few fights ago. You look at his record there, 10 wins, 6 of them are via KO, TKO. We are starting to see the holes in Seung Choi's game, though, over his last couple of fights. Not really the best at defending submissions, like we saw 2 fights ago. The grappling IQ in general might not be the highest. And in his last fight, he was dropped twice. The chin might be questionable at this point. You almost question if Choi has that toughness factor, that heart factor, to really pull through in those types of situations. Both fighters are gonna get the fight that they're looking for. I think this is gonna be a striking match, a kickboxing fight, basically. Choi maybe just isn't the prospect that I thought he was. He looked kind of slow in his last fight. He looked kind of flat in his last fight as well. I definitely think that Trizano is the tougher fighter. If this becomes a war, Trizano definitely could come out on top in this one. But I think that's kind of unlikely. I think, again, both of these guys have lower striking rates. Neither of these guys are super quick or use a lot of movement. I expect a technical fight where both guys are going to land big shots. At the same time, I do believe Choi is the higher level striker, the more pure technician when it comes to the striking. And I think that's what's ultimately going to push the fight in his favor. That said, it's really close. If you're looking at the odds here, minus 160 for Choi, plus 135 for Mike Trizano. I actually see this as a 50-50 fight. So from a betting perspective, you could make a case for a dog or pass type of thing here. If not a 50-50, slightly tipping in scale in favor of Choi. I think Choi needs to prove it to me that he is a higher level fighter before I can feel confident in this type of match, even though he has the type of matchup that he's looking for. Now, that said, I am picking Choi to get it done. But like I said, from a betting perspective, you probably want to go dog or pass. I'd be very careful with this one. I think either fighter can get it done. But again, making it official, my pick will be Seung Choi. Fourth fight of our prelims, we're looking at Karolina Kowalkiewicz versus Silvana Gómez Juárez. For Kowalkiewicz, she snapped, I should say, a 5-fight losing streak that she was on when she beat Felice Herrig back in June. Technically, still very sound in the stand-up. Her striking did look a bit rejuvenated in her last fight. She has that Muay Thai style of stand-up. She is still a very diverse striker. She's a point fighter, likes a technical fight, solid movement, solid combinations. She's comfortable in the clinch, but she is getting up there in age. I think 37 years old at this point. She's definitely past her prime. Not really the best at handling pressure. She also lacks some striking defense with her lack of head movement, and that really could cost her in this fight. Silvana Gómez Juárez, 37 years old as well. So that's something very important to note. She beat Na Liang back in June. She's introduced as a striker. She definitely is a striker in terms of her style. Looks like her jab is pretty decent. She's primarily a boxer. She fights from range. She's patient. And she uses that patience to kind of set up that big power that she has. You look at her record there, 11 wins. 7 of those 11 wins are via KO, TKO. That doesn't happen much in women's MMA in general, never mind in the women's strawweight division. She's had issues in the past with her opponent's aggressiveness, so kind of similar to Kowalkiewicz from that perspective. She's also had issues with takedown defense and grappling as a whole. I don't think either of those would be a problem for this fight, but Kowalkiewicz technically has the advantage in that area. Few things that I think are true for this fight. Firstly, I think that Karolina is the better overall striker. I think that Karolina is the better overall MMA fighter. Second thing that I think is true for this fight is that I just can't trust Karolina at all. I did think that she would get it done versus Herrig, but to me, she's done, right? She leaves her chin up. Her striking defense isn't great. She gets hit clean in her fights, especially as she's gotten up there in age. And even against strikers who aren't the highest levels of striker, still manage to catch her clean in terms of their hits. That to me is going to allow Juárez a big opportunity to land a KO victory here. Now, at the same time, I can't all the way trust Juárez either, right? She's a bit one-dimensional in terms of that boxing style really being the only thing that she offers up. But I think about Karolina, this is a few years ago, versus Alexa Grasso, much different level of fighter, Alexa Grasso versus Juárez. So let me make sure I set that precedence. And it was a different time. It was about 4 years ago. But Alexa Grasso was able to pick Karolina apart with the boxing and with the movement. I think Juárez, again, not as clean of a boxer, not as good of movement, but I do think that Juárez can take from that game plan. And, again, I thought Karolina was done before her last fight. She was on a 5-fight losing streak. She was just mentally checked out. She got a resurgence with her last win, but I think in this fight, she kind of comes back to earth, and I wouldn't be surprised if she retires after this fight. I mean, Joanna Jędrzejczyk retired, right? And she mentioned Joanna as a part of her rejuvenation. So I wouldn't be surprised if she follows. I know they're both 37 years old, but to me, Karolina definitely has a lot more miles on the body. And I think, again, Silvana Gómez Juárez has the opportunity to potentially knock her out, if not just simply hurt her on the feet for at least 2 rounds. So I'm going Silvana Gómez Juárez, but very close fight. Cannot trust either fighter. Take that with a grain of salt. Let's move on to our 5th fight, and let's round off the early prelims. We're looking at Matt Frevola versus Ottman Azaitar. Another close fight in terms of the betting lines. We have Matt Frevola at -130, Ottman Azaitar at +110. For Ottman Azaitar, it's been over 2 years since his last fight. He beat Kamaworthy all the way back September 2020. Takes his time on the feet. He's patient, fakes, feints, decent head movement. He's going to look to set up those shots. He has good boxing, really good boxing, in my opinion. He lures you in with those fakes and those feints and that patience, and he's an effective, accurate counterpuncher to go on top of that. He has a good jab to keep opponents at distance, really good punches in the clinch. Interesting to see how active and how accurate he is in those clinch situations. I mean, just watch that last fight versus Kamaworthy. He landed 2, 3, 4, 5 very clean punches in that clinch to ultimately end the fight. Has a lot of power, right? And with that power, it's from clean, accurate accumulation of strikes rather than just kind of one big shot, even though he has that in him as well. So pretty talented stand-up artist, Ottman Azaitar, going up against Matt Frevola, who is pretty talented in other ways. Matt Frevola beat Genaro Valdez back in January. Like I said, in other ways, because the stand-up, somewhat basic. He does have some boxing. He does have some kicks, throws at a good pace. He stays busy, throws in combinations. He does have a pretty big right hand, also has good pressure and definitely willing to engage. So the stand-up is something that he's worked on. He has improved movement. Not the highest level of technique per se on the feet, but you can definitely tell he's worked at it. He has good wrestling though. He has good takedowns. He has, especially good slams, good top control, some ground and pound, some body locks, really commands that control when he's on top. You see the takedown numbers there, almost 2.5 per fight. So, I mean, again, we're definitely looking at a clash of styles. Striker versus wrestler, Azaitar versus Frevola. Both of them can have their paths to victory in this fight. Interestingly enough, this fight was supposed to happen back in January 2021, this exact matchup. Ottman Azaitar at that time was a minus 160 favorite. We're now seeing Ottman Azaitar as a plus 110 underdog. What has happened in that time? Well, Matt Frevola fought twice. He went 1-1, and Azaitar has been shelved, right? So Frevola hasn't really shown us anything to warrant those odds switching. Azaitar, of course, he shelved for a longer period of time. So a lot of people potentially think that ring rust is going to play a factor here. Interesting, though. Frevola was in a firefight in his last fight. I think if he tried to exchange like that with Ottman Azaitar, it would result in Frevola being finished. For as solid as Frevola's wrestling is, I do notice that he keeps the fight on the feet maybe more than he should, at least in his past couple of fights. And this is where I often talk about fighters who are improving their striking, it almost working against them because it's almost like they want to prove it, right? So Matt Frevola seems to be falling into that category, at least over his past couple of fights. Again, just keeping it on the feet more than he should. And I think that tendency could ultimately cost him here. I think Azaitar can get the finish here. He has been off for some time, but he was preparing for Frevola in the past when they were originally supposed to fight again in January 2021. So you imagine your training camp at that time, you're defending takedowns, you realize almost 2 years later, you're fighting the same opponent, and it's right back to the same game plan, right back to the same training camp. So I think he's going to be ready to keep the fight standing, to fend off those takedowns. Frevola only lands at about a 40% clip, so it's not like as soon as he grabs you, you're on the ground. So I think Azaitar is going to be able to keep it standing, is going to be better on the feet. And I think there was a reason as to why he was the favorite when this matchup was supposed to happen almost 2 years ago. So I'm going Ottman Azaitar to get it done. My first underdog pick of the card, if I'm not mistaken, but Ottman Azaitar is going to be that. So finished with the early prelims. Let's move to our regular prelims. We have fight number 6 of our prelim event here. We have Andre Petroski versus Wellington Turman in the middleweight division. Andre Petroski, bigger favorite, minus 210. Wellington Turman, a plus 175 underdog. Andre Petroski had a good win over Nick Maximov back in May. He's on a 3-fight winning streak now. He's a southpaw. He's primarily hands in the stand-up. Really likes that body kick. Good aggression, good pace, good legitimate wrestling, and he's good at getting takedowns. He has decent control on top. He's very comfortable on the ground. That's definitely his strength. Legitimate grappling as well. So he's not just a wrestler. You look at his record there, 8 wins, 2 losses. Half of those wins are via submission. He sets up the submissions really well, has really good positioning, and he's very patient when setting those submissions up. I mean, just watch that last fight versus Nick Maximov to get a good example of that. And with Andre Petroski, the biggest red flag for him is that his cardio hasn't been the best. He's starting to get more comfortable in there. He's starting to pace himself a little bit better. But I mean, you look at his frame, you look at his physique, you look at the aggressive pace early in the fight, you look at the wrestling style, and all of that just adds up to not quite having the best cardio. But again, he's shown himself to be a little bit more effective as he gains more and more UFC experience. Wellington Turman is on a 2-fight winning streak in his own right. He beat Misha Serkinov back in February. He's considered a BJJ practitioner. Good clinch, solid takedown ability, good wrestling ability with his frame. He's going to chain it together. He's going to stay on your back. He's going to stay committed to that advantageous position rather than try to rush a takedown. That's where you see his takedown numbers maybe not as generous, about 2 takedowns per and about 20% because accuracy-wise, because again, he is willing to play that grind you against the cage, hold the good position rather than only try to go for the takedown per se. In the stand up, he has, heavy hands, hard jab, a bit of a slow striker though, but he does have good power, right? Good power, again, lacks the striking speed. To me, this is a pretty well matched fight here. We're looking at two fighters, similar height, similar reach, similar physique as well. Two fighters with similar strengths. We know that Petroski is more of the wrestler grappler, while Turman is more of the, dare I say, grappler wrestler. So very similar fighters in these two. Also, two fighters that don't really have the best cardio. So that's going to be interesting to see how that one fares out. I'm leaning Andre Petroski on this one, though. I'm kind of Petroski all the way on this one, actually, because Wellington Turman, in his last fight versus Misha Cirkunov, I think he showed me everything that I need to know in terms of how this one can play out, despite Turman's offensive wrestling that he has. Again, like I said, grappler, wrestler, so he does have some wrestling with him. He was on his back for 2 rounds in that last fight. Misha Cirkunov showed that he could be the better wrestler. I think Andre Petroski is going to show that he's the better wrestler as well. Now, in that fight, of course, Misha Cirkunov got caught with I think it was an arm triangle, or something along those lines. But the huge difference here for me is that Andre Petroski is a legitimate grappler as well. He's not Misha Cirkunov, where it's just wrestling. He's Andre Petroski, where he has legitimate grappling as well. I think that Turman was able to catch Cirkunov in a quick submission, but I don't see him catching Petroski in that same type of situation. I think this could be an ugly one later in the fight. Both guys super tired, neither guy really winning the round. But I think that before that happens, Petroski will be able to decisively get 2 rounds in his favor, or decisively get even 1.5 rounds in his favor before both of these guys tire out. And I think that's going to lead us to a 29-28 unanimous decision, if not Petroski ending it earlier than that. Let's move on to our 7th fight of our prelims. We have Erin Blanchfield versus Molly McCann. We see Erin Blanchfield as the huge favorite here, -400, versus Meatball McCann, who's coming in as the +310 underdog. Blanchfield is on a 6-fight win streak after beating JJ Aldrich back in June. She's introduced as a jiu-jitsu practitioner, 23 years old. She's still very young, still improving in each fight. She's composed. She has improved striking. She has good striking diversity. She's going to use her jabs, the low kick, the fakes and the feints, different angles. Has some striking IQ. She does close distance while she has a consistent pace. I would consider her stand-up to be improving, though. I wouldn't consider her stand-up to be high level per se. She sets up her ground game really well. She has a pretty strong body lock, has a solid clinch. She has solid takedowns. We see the numbers there, not only 4 takedowns per fight, but we see the accuracy at almost 70%. That tells you that she knows what she's doing there. She is well versed on the ground, has good ground and pound to go along with it. And a good example of those takedown numbers is watch that fight versus Miranda Maverick. Now, we know Maverick to be a pretty solid wrestler, but Erin Blanchfield, great offensive groundwork in that one. She looked like Khabib in that fight, right? Also has a respectable 75% takedown defense. So Blanchfield, you look at her, she's definitely someone who's well-rounded, improving, very young fighter. She could be someone that could be a legitimate contender at some point in time. And I think this is the type of fight to get either of these fighters in that space, going up against Molly McCann, who's on a 3-fight winning streak and has a ton of momentum behind her name right now. She beat Hannah Goldie back in July. Molly McCann is usually a very fast starter, a bit of a brawler type in the stand-up. Striking is solid. She can definitely, switch stance, use that overhand hook, press the action early in the fight. She sits on her punches. She has good power. Just solid boxing overall. Now, she is a little bit well-rounded in her own right. She averages almost 2 takedowns a fight, about 35% accuracy. Wouldn't really consider her a high-level wrestler, but she has landed 4 takedowns in her last 3 fights. So it is something that she's starting to, not even really starting to, but it is something that she has in her game to some regular degree. The biggest gripe when considering betting on Molly McCann is that she's always in a fight that kind of looks 50-50, right? She's tough, she can brawl, she has a lot of heart, she has that explosive knockout power at any point in time. She's tough. She likes to go toe to toe. She likes to engage with her opponents, and she's always in a fight that looks very close, even if it doesn't go the way that she wants it to. Now, as a plus 310 underdog, that might be a good thing, right? That might be enough reason to say, you know what, I'm going dog or pass on this one. Molly McCann has some value here. She's definitely the more dangerous striker of the two. But to me, or at least just based on what I'm seeing, Blanchfield fared pretty well against a legitimate striker in JJ Aldrich in her last fight, right? Molly McCann also has, and I'm looking at the X factors of what will actually take place in this fight. So Erin Blanchfield shows me that she can take on a pure striker in JJ Aldrich, or at least a better striker, I should say. McCann also has just 46% takedown defense. And I think that's going to be a key advantage for Erin Blanchfield to capitalize on. She didn't land any takedowns in her last fight, Erin Blanchfield, but Blanchfield does have a combined 10 takedowns. Sorry, I'm going to try that again. Blanchfield has a combined 10 takedowns in her 2 fights prior to that. So again, it'll be interesting to see if she game plans for that advantage that she has, because it's evident that when she does game plan for it, she can land takedown after takedown after takedown. Overall, I just don't think this is the best matchup for Molly McCann. Erin Blanchfield, she's going to have, 4 or 5 inches in reach. They're the same height, but she's going to be able to keep Molly at range. And when she does get in close, I can see Blanchfield landing those takedowns. I don't even want to claim dog or pass on this one. I actually really like Erin Blanchfield in this spot. I think, again, she's just in a very favorable position to win this fight. I think she matches up very well. I think she has the advantage almost everywhere outside of the aggression, outside of the explosiveness, outside of the lucky punch moment, for lack of a better word. I think this is Erin Blanchfield all the way. So this is something I'm potentially looking on some parlay action, especially once I see how they look come face-off time. This is not going on in the UK, if I'm not mistaken. So let's double check on that one, actually. Let's see where this is going on. This is going on in New York. So this fight is not in the UK. Molly McCann is not at home. She doesn't have that home crowd in her favor. And I think, that winning streak is going to come to an end because Erin Blanchfield is going to get it done. Let's move on to our 8th fight. In our prelims, we're looking at Dominick Reyes versus Ryan Spann. Reyes is on a 3-fight losing streak, back-to-back knockouts as well. Lost to Yuri Prochazka back in May of last year. He just introduced as a kickboxer as well as a wrestler. He's a patient striker. He's a southpaw. Good straight left hand. Good kicks. Good movement. Pretty light on the feet. Good lateral movements as well. He's a well-rounded, diverse striker. Doesn't really put up many takedowns, but he did land one in his last fight. And again, he does have that wrestler background. So we know he has it in him, but in the UFC, he's really only shown us his striking. Ryan Spann, on the other hand, has shown us a little bit of everything. Good win over Yon Kutalaba back in May. The stand-up is decent. He has that methodical pace. Uses a very active jab, solid 1-2 punch. Not really the most active striker, but he does have good power. He might have a questionable chin. He has been finished a few times in his career. He's also going to try to wrestle you, or at least use that clinch to kind of, again, rough you up against the cage and kind of score points that way. Good head position on the cage. Keeps you there with the clinch, the underhooks. From a takedown perspective, only 1.5 per fight, right? 40% accuracy, which isn't bad, but that 1.5 per fight kind of tells you stylistically he'd almost rather grind you against the cage than necessarily go for the takedown. But look for him to include that in his game plan. We look at Dominick Reyes here, again, 3-fight losing streak. That tells you at one point he was 12-0, right? He needs a win. I think he's taken some necessary time off at this point, about 18 months. I think that 18-month layoff is going to work well for him. Like I said, coming off of back-to-back knockouts, most recent one to Yuri Prochazka. Dominick Reyes had some good moments in that last fight. versus Prochaska, despite being finished. He was winning the first round at the time, in my opinion, before getting hurt, and then ultimately finished. I think this fight stays on the feet. Reyes has good takedown defense at 80%. Spann isn't the strongest wrestler per se. So I think this fight stays on the feet. I think both guys can hurt each other. I mean, we are in the light heavyweight division, so that doesn't surprise me. But I think Reyes is going to be able to land first. He throws at the higher pace. He throws at the more consistent pace. Like I mentioned with Ryan Spann, just not really the most active striker. So I think that's going to allow Dominick Reyes the chance to land first. Again, Dominick Reyes needs a win here, and I think this is a good matchup for him to get it done. I'd be careful from a betting perspective. We're looking at the line here. Dominick Reyes minus 230, Ryan Spann plus 190. Ryan Spann is legit, and I would need to see a history of odds, but I feel like Ryan Spann does, decently well in that underdog spot. So I would be really worried if I'm looking at betting on this. I'm not putting this on parlays. I'm not really considering the underdog per se. Dominick Reyes will be my pick, but like I said, Ryan Spann is someone who's really tricky to bet against because in some ways you don't know which version of Ryan Spann is going to show up. So Ryan Spann has a shot, has some value as a dog, but I think Dominick Reyes needs the win, and I think he's going to find a way to pull it out. Let's move on to our final fight of our prelims. We're looking at Brad Riddell versus Renato Moicano. For Moicano, lost to Rafael dos Anjos back in March. Took a lot of damage in that fight. He's a well-rounded fighter otherwise. Good hands, good calf kick usage, moves pretty decent laterally, patient striker, good 1-2s. The straight punches in general are pretty solid. He's a good counter puncher, Renato Moicano. Decent takedowns as well. 1.7 takedowns per, almost 50% accuracy, has good grappling to go along with it. And although his chin is maybe a little bit questionable, he is tough. He definitely showed that in his last fight, showed that it's hard to get him out of here, has the heart, willing to keep going, willing to fight while hurt. Definitely has that toughness factor to him. Brad Riddell, 2-fight losing streak, lost to Jalen Turner back in July. He's a striker, city kickboxing product. I mean, city kickboxing is sprinkled all over this card, unsurprisingly. Brad Riddell has a quick jab, good tight combinations, tight hooks. He's a methodical striker, high technique with his striking as well. You're not going to really see him push the pace per se. More so a good counter striker. Again, good combinations, nasty leg kick. The thing with Riddell is that he's going to fight off that back foot. He's going to allow you to lead. We've also seen him get taken down in the past as well, but he's also able to land takedowns in his own right. Legitimately a solid wrestler, kind of similar to Moicano, almost 2 takedowns per. I won't spend too much time on this prediction. Simply put, I think Riddell is the higher level striker here, the more pure kickboxer, the more pure Muay Thai artist. I think we saw a good example of that in Moicano's last fight. Now, RDA, different level of opponent, but RDA, that more pure kickboxer, that more pure Muay Thai artist, we saw what that could look like for Moicano. Didn't really have an answer on the feet against a high-level striker. What'll hurt Brad Riddell here is that he's not aggressive enough. Oftentimes he's a reactive fighter, a reactive striker, but the good thing about Brad Riddell is that he eventually finds that next gear. He eventually picks up the pace. He eventually starts to pick up the pressure and press forward. And I think that's when he'll, really start to shine. I also think him being on a 2-fight losing streak will make that next gear happen maybe sooner than it otherwise could, right? I don't think Moicano will be able to catch him before that happens. I'm actually a little surprised to see Brad Riddell open up as an underdog here, but the way that Moicano lost in his last fight, and even if Riddell was a minus 170 favorite, I'd feel pretty good about him. Especially as an underdog, I feel really good about him. Very good underdog odds here, plus 105. Brad Riddell, he's going to be my pick. Let's move on to our main card, where we have 5 fights overall. First fight of our main card, we have Dan Hooker versus Claudio Puelles. Dan Hooker was beaten up badly by Arnold Allen in his last fight. That was back in March. He's right back at lightweight after this one. He went down to 145 for that Arnold Allen fight. He's come right back up to 155 for this one. 1-4 in his last 5 fights, Dan Hooker. Although Poirier, Chandler, Makhachev, Arnold Allen, those aren't 4 shameful losses to have by any means. He's a lengthy, rangy striker. He's going to use his jab. He has crisp boxing, crisp kickboxing, puts on a constant pressure, constant pace, uses it to control center of the octagon, uses that calf kick very effectively. He has good movement, good combinations, good control. And when he's on, I mean, he's still a high-level fighter, still very much a high-level striker. We saw the back and forth that him and Dustin Poirier had as an example. So that shows you the level that he can compete at. Claudio Puelles, on the other hand, 5-fight winning streak after he beat Clay Guida back in April. Kind of fights tall, that Muay Thai, traditional Muay Thai stance in some ways. He's also a southpaw, bit of a hesitant striker. We see the striking rate there, 1.99 significant strikes landed per minute is very low by UFC standards. You usually want to see 4+ in terms of that number. Good fakes and feints though, good kicks, decent hands when he actually does throw it. He does have a bit of a ground game. 1.5 submissions almost per fight, almost 3 takedowns per fight, almost 40% accuracy from the takedown perspective. I've seen him pull guard or kind of choose to stay on his back. I've seen him scramble decently if he is taken down, intelligently use his grappling to work his way back up. I don't see that being an issue in this one, though. I don't think that Hooker is going to try to take this fight to the ground. And again, like I said, for Puelles, I've also seen him be able to land takedowns pretty effectively in his own right. Now, I think there's a lot of reasons to like Claudio Puelles as an underdog here, right? Puelles has that ground advantage without a doubt, both with takedowns and with grappling. With the Muay Thai, Puelles has the skill potentially to go toe-to-toe with Dan Hooker, at least on paper. But for me, I think experience is a real thing, right? I think there's a huge difference between, I'm going to name 5 names: Arnold Allen, Islam Makhachev, Nasrat Haqparast, Michael Chandler, Dustin Poirier. Those are Dan Hooker's last 5 opponents. I'm going to name 5 other names: Clay Guida, Chris Grutzmacher, Jordan Levitt, Marcos Mariano, Felipe Silva. Those are Claudio Puelles' last 5 opponents, right? So I think the level of fighter really means something here. I'm not overly concerned with the grappling if I'm Dan Hooker, though it is a legitimate threat, of course. I mean, we saw how quickly Claudio Puelles was able to land that knee bar on Clay Guida that ultimately ended the fight because Clay Guida was winning that fight. Hooker has double-digit losses to his name, of course, but only 2 of them are via submission. Also, just like Adesanya, just like that entire City Kickboxing camp, we know that that camp works against the ground threat often, since they're all such prominent strikers and since they know that's where fighters are going to try to expose them. So I would imagine that Dan Hooker is well prepared from that grappling threat perspective. And in terms of the striking, I did mention that Puelles is a bit of a hesitant striker. I can see Hooker winning the battle of ring control. I can see Hooker having the higher pace. I can see Hooker having more activity. And I think he'll use that, 3 or 4 inch reach advantage that he has to his advantage to make sure that the fight stays on the feet as much as possible. We also can't forget Dan Hooker. Yes, he's 1-4 in his last fight. Yes, 4 very solid opponents, but just mentality wise, he's still only 32 years old, right? I mean, he's still relevant. He needs a win. This is a big step down in competition for him. And I think he's going to get the job done. Minus 170 isn't the worst value at all. Again, Puelles is a legitimate threat, but I just don't think Claudio Puelles is ready to take on an opponent the level of Dan Hooker. So I'm looking at Dan Hooker to get this one done all the way. Second fight of our main card. It's a good one. We have Frankie Edgar versus Chris Gutierrez in the bantamweight division. Frankie Edgar is on a 2-fight losing streak after losing to Marlon Vera last year around this time. 1-4 in his last 5 fights now First thing you got to point out with Frankie Edgar, I mean, he's past his prime, right? 41 years old at this point. His game is still predicated on good movement, constant lateral movement, constant combinations, constant pressure, constant head movement. He's definitely a hard target to hit, even at this age. Solid, crisp punches. He's going to land in combinations. Still has good striking speed. Still going to shoot for the takedown at this stage in his career. Still solid wrestling, just not really a threat at this stage in his career. Also, got to ask yourself where he is mentally, right? Not only with his age, 41 years old, definitely past his prime, but also after the brutal knockout that he had last year, kind of have to ask yourself, is he fighting for money? Because otherwise, what's his purpose for taking on a rising star in Chris Gutierrez, right? Gutierrez is on a 3-fight winning streak after beating Karolina back in March. He's unbeaten in his last 7 fights now. High-level striker, high-level striking IQ, picks his spots really well, has a dangerous calf kick. We know he has probably one of the best calf kicks in the UFC, one of the best at game planning for that calf kick, if not the best. He's going to switch stance often, very light on the feet. He's going to use a lot of fakes, good ability to control the center of the octagon, respectable 73% takedown defense, which could be important here, but I'll keep the prediction short. I really like Chris Gutierrez in this spot. Minus 220, I think, is fantastic value for Chris Gutierrez. I like the value, right? Edgar's age just doesn't fare well in this division. For Frankie Edgar to win, I think he's going to have to take Gutierrez down and have legitimate ground control time in all 3 rounds, or obviously at least 2 of the rounds. And it could happen. I mean, we don't know. It could happen, but I just don't see it happening at this stage in Edgar's career. I think in terms of the striking, Edgar's style, the quicker punches, the more combinations, rather than being a legitimate power threat, I think that can actually work in Chris Gutierrez's favor here. Gutierrez is a high-level striker. Gutierrez is a good counter puncher. And if Frankie Edgar is going to be trying to come forward, I can see Gutierrez first round just chopping that leg to pieces until eventually Gutierrez is the one pressing forward in the second round, ultimately leading to a finish and potentially leading to the retirement of Frankie Edgar, right? I really like Chris Gutierrez in this spot. This is definitely going to be a parlay piece for me. Minus 220. Give me Chris Gutierrez all day on that one. Now we get to the exciting fights. Fight number 3 of our main card, Dustin Poirier, Michael Chandler. Great lightweight fight here. We know that Poirier lost to Charles Oliveira. That was almost a year ago. He's a southpaw, one of the best strikers in the UFC, particularly with that boxing. We know he has good striking defense, good head movement, good IQ, just good movement in general. It's a good counter puncher, good combinations, has that steady pace on the feet, has a great chin, has great cardio. He can threaten the takedown, almost 1.5 takedowns per fight, though I wouldn't really call him a great wrestler. He can threaten the submission, over 1 submission attempt per fight, though I wouldn't call him a great submission artist. To me, he's primarily a striker, so expect him to keep the fight standing. Michael Chandler beat Tony Ferguson back in May. On the feet, good in and out movement, good jab, good straight. I think that's one of his kind of main weapons is that straight punch. He has that stalking pressure style of stand-up. He's going to put everything into his punches. We know that about Michael Chandler already. He knocks guys out, especially with that power hand. I would say underrated striking IQ, though. Not many people give him credit for that. He sets up things really well. Again, the in and out movement is pretty good. He mixes up his punches well. He uses those body strikes, uses level changes, given the fact that he is a wrestling threat. And to that point, he is a good wrestler. It is something he can legitimately resort to. He does have legitimate takedowns. Interesting to see his takedown numbers, just 1.8 in the UFC. And I think that kind of has to do with his biggest weakness. I think his biggest weakness from a betting perspective, at least, is that he's a crowd pleaser, right? He's a high-paced fighter. He's a crowd pleaser. He's going to be somebody that doesn't necessarily capitalize on his advantage in favor of trying to win that fight of the night, trying to get that extra 50K, right? Again, also a high-paced fighter, and that pace will cost him in the cardio department. I think Chandler's second biggest weakness in terms of just in general, but also in terms of betting, is that he's been dropped by everyone he's faced in the UFC thus far. He's hittable. The chin is definitely showing signs of age. The chin was never amazing, at least for the past several years. He always has been somebody who can be dropped, right? We did see Dustin Poirier tire out a little bit after a high-paced first round in his last fight. So that's going to be important here because if Chandler can give Poirier a pace that he's not necessarily ready for, that can maybe drain Poirier's cardio tank quicker than Poirier wants, right? Um, Again, that could be something to watch for. I do think that this fight will be a high-paced striking match as Michael Chandler looks to entertain the crowd. I think that Chandler can take advantage of a few takedowns. Again, legitimate wrestling here. But I don't think he'll use it enough as part of his game plan, just going back to his biggest weakness, crowd pleaser, right? And on the feet, I think Dustin is smarter. I think Dustin is better. I can see him winning the exchanges. I can see him avoiding the bombs from Michael Chandler. Again, pretty good striking defense. And I can potentially see, well, I can most likely see Dustin Poirier dropping Michael Chandler at least once. Maybe not a fight ending drop, but I can see at least one drop happening early in the fight. Now, if Michael Chandler resorts to wrestling, he can find a legitimate 2 to 3 minutes of ground control in at least 2 rounds, right? Chandler can also land that bomb. Legitimate underdog here. High level fighter, of course. But Dustin Poirier is going to be my pick. I'm banking on most of this fight being a crowd pleasing striking match. I'm banking on Chandler not necessarily caring about win, lose, or draw, more so caring about entertainment crowd. And I'm banking on Poirier being the better striker. So Dustin Poirier is going to be my pick. This might be a parlay piece. Not 100% sure yet, but my gut is telling me Poirier all the way on this one. Let's go on to our co-main event of the evening. We have Carla Esparza versus Zhang Weili. For Carla Esparza, she's a champ, 6-fight win streak. She beat Thug Rose back in May via split decision in probably one of the worst title fights of all time. Oftentimes, she finds herself in a close fight, Carla Esparza. She has 3 split decision losses, 3 split decision wins, and also a majority decision win on her resume. So that's 7 fights of her 26 professional fights that could have gone either way. She's a relentless wrestler. She's going to get the fight to the ground. She's going to do everything that she can to keep it there. Not really the strongest on the feet, but she has toughness. She'll eat shots. She'll show the damage at the expense of trying to implement that relentless wrestling that she has. And she's really good at keeping girls down and controlling once she does land that takedown. We look at the takedown numbers there, 3 per fight. So she's going to find it at some point. For Zhang Weili, she beat Joanna Jędrzejczyk back in June, sent her into retirement. She looked refreshed and refocused in that fight. High-level striking, high IQ, good movement, good footwork. She can land big combinations, and she has good power. Big right-hand hook, good fakes, good feints. She's usually controlling, fighting from the center of the octagon. Really just a high-level striker, high-level MMA fighter in general. She has that constant pressure, especially once she really starts to find her rhythm. Good groundwork as well, good offensive wrestling, good takedown. She's comfortable on the ground, good top control, good scrambling. And we know that she's very strong, right? She had that viral moment of lifting up Francis Ngannou, and Ngannou was telling like, hey, I was worried that she may have injured her back or something, but she lifted me no problem, right? Um, and we saw that strength, especially in her last fight, although a completely different type of opponent in Joanna Jędrzejczyk, just controlling her at all times, in all moments. She was just the stronger fighter. Zhang Weili, simply put, is a complete fighter. I'll keep the prediction really short here. I'm Zhang Weili all the way on this one. I think this is like the lock of the year. Zhang Weili, I'm 100% putting this on any parlay that I have. The Esparza Namajunas fight showed me everything that I needed to see. We know that Esparza is severely outclassed on the feet here. And although Zhang only has 60% takedown defense on paper, that's really only by way of giving up 2 takedowns to Thug Rose in comparison to the 8 fights that she's had in the UFC. She's landed, she's given up 2 takedowns in 8 UFC fights. And really that was just to Thug Rose. That's the point that I tried to get across there. Comparatively, offensively, she's landed 13 takedowns in that same time period. So again, she definitely has the IQ on the ground to at least put up some form against Carla Esparza's, some form of defense against Carla Esparza's main strength. I also think that Zhang can be physically stronger, again, which will be key in the wrestling exchanges here. And simply put, I mean, Carla Esparza should not have beaten Thug Rose, right? There's no reason to believe she's going to beat Zhang Weili. I don't think Weili is going to give her the same staring match that Thug Rose gave her. I think Weili is going to give her more aggression, more pace on the feet, while still having the IQ to avoid those takedowns the way that Thug Rose was able to. So Zhang Weili all the way, lock of the year, book it. Main event. Let's go into our main event. Israel Adesanya, Alex Pereira. Adesanya beat Cannonier back in July. We know he's a masterful striker at this point. Distance control, pace, combinations, his ability to draw opponents in. He can pick his opponents apart with that striking. We know the takedown defense has proven to be good in the middleweight division. I don't think that'll matter in this fight, so I won't go on that point. Alex Pereira, legitimate win over Sean Strickland in his last fight. That was on the same card where Adesanya was the main event. 3-0 in the UFC now. We know his extensive kickboxing background, despite having just 7 MMA fights. He likes to come forward. He's good at it. He's patient, closes distance on his opponents. Good high kick, good body kick, good knees, good short hook. We know that's a specialty. That short hook carries a lot of power. Doesn't really have to load it up much to knock guys out. And we know that fighters are going to test his takedown defense, and his takedown defense is pretty solid as well. But again, takedowns won't matter here. We know that this will be a striking match. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time getting into the history between these two fighters. I think we all know the storyline between these two, but essentially from a focusing on just the betting perspective, both of these guys are high-level strikers. I'm expecting Israel Adesanya to be the faster technician, while Pereira has the power advantage. And I don't think a prediction really requires too much thought here. I think that one thing is true in this fight. No matter the result of the fight, I do think that Israel Adesanya will be winning the fight at the time if it were to go to points. I look at this fight kind of similar to like a Derek Lewis versus Cyril Gane type of fight. Though I want to give much more respect to Alex Pereira, I don't want to compare him to Derek Lewis. I think Pereira still has the technique, the IQ on the feet by comparison, so it's not exactly that. But when I say Lewis versus Gane, regardless, if Lewis caught Gane, Gane would have been winning in that entire fight, like we saw, right? If Pereira catches Adesanya, Adesanya is going to be winning that entire fight at that time, right? Now, that theme of the fight is something that I can see happening here, right? I can see Alex Pereira catching him. We've seen Adesanya go up against power before. I mean, Cannonier is a good example of that. And the game plan is to kind of just keep picking away, keep racking up points, keep putting the striking stats in his favor. This fight will simply be about whether or not Pereira catches him with that hook. I'm essentially betting that he doesn't, right? I think this is too soon for Alex Pereira. I think it would have been important to him for maybe to face a few more different styles before taking on the champ. I think MMA is a lot different than kickboxing. And I think Adesanya's MMA experience is going to pay off for him. I love that Alex Pereira has this noise behind his name because we're getting Adesanya at minus 190. That doesn't happen often. I really like the value on Adesanya here. I like the value on Adesanya more than anything else for this fight. Again, like I said, I think he's going to pick him apart. And if he doesn't get caught, it's 50-45 unanimous. If he does get caught, let's see how he reacts, right? But ultimately, big moments or not, knockout or not, Adesanya will be winning the fight. So I'm banking on him winning the fight until the end, minus 190. Love the odds there. Adesanya all the way on that one. Let me take it to Vegas now, and let's take a look at these 14 fights, and let's take a look at some underdog action as well as some parlay action. So in terms of underdogs, I'm taking a look at, just want to take a second here to see which one is my favorite. I was thinking about Brad Riddell, but I think my favorite underdog here is going to be Ottman Azaitar. I almost had him as a favorite until I realized he was the underdog. So I guess he's gonna be my official underdog pick, Ottman Azaitar. And in terms of putting a parlay together, 3 fights I feel good about, 3 fights on the main card: Chris Gutierrez, Zhang Weili, Israel Adesanya. I think those 3 get it done. Those 3 are going to pay a 2.91. That means a $100 bet will get you a total return of $291. And a $250 bet will get you a total return of $729. So officially signing off on that note. Appreciate you watching. Definitely let us know in the comments how you feel about the picks, who your underdog pick is, what parlays you're looking at. Make sure you hit the thumbs up on this video in the meantime, and make sure you subscribe to the channel here at Boxing MMA Picks while you're at it. In the meantime, this has been UFC 281, Israel Adesanya versus Alex Pereira, full card prediction video presented by yours truly here at Boxing MMA Picks. Again, Harris flying solo for this one, but we got to keep the money going in our usual fashion. Let's get this money.